Good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for people to join the webinar. We're still seeing the numbers climb, so we're just going to wait a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar on Carlisle's VacuSeal system. My name is Alex Drescher, and I'm the VacuSeal product manager for Carlisle. Presenting with me is Jeremiah Robinson with V2T Technologies, our partner in the VacuSeal system. The intent of today's webinar is to provide an overview of the system, the best applications, the steps for installation, and also the ordering and sales process. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them via the chat or the question box on the right-hand side. At the end of the presentation, there will be plenty of time for myself and Jeremiah to answer any questions that you may have. So first, I'm just going to give a brief overview on the system and how the vents work to hold everything in place. While the system and the technology seems like new innovative technology, V2T has been in the marketplace for several years, and Carlisle has been working with V2T for over 10 years. Most recently, we have enhanced that partnership in order to deliver a single source channel for all these components in the system. We've also enhanced our marketing resources and our technical resources, like developing our own specs and details, to also promote and educate the marketplace on the VacuSeal system. So first, what I want to do is just dive a little bit deeper into how the vent works. Essentially, the system is a loose laid or ballasted system. So all the components from your insulation, cover board, and membrane are all completely loose laid. Instead of utilizing stone ballast, we have specialized vents that create negative pressure to hold the roofing system in place. So I'm going to play this animation that gives you a little bit of a visual of how the vents work. As wind is blowing on top of the roof, the air passes through these V2T vents, and through the narrow channel between the two spheres, the air is accelerated between the two spheres. At the same time, air is being pulled out from underneath the membrane through the bottom sphere of the vent, thus creating the negative pressure to hold everything in place. It creates a vacuum seal to hold all the loose components in place. And I'll get into how many vents are placed on the roof and the layout in the coming slides as well. But when we look at the system as a whole, these are two sandwich drawings that show kind of the system assemblies as examples. The first step in the process here is to make sure that there is a complete air seal at the deck level. This can be achieved by either having a solid substrate deck like a concrete deck, or by using various Carlisle air and vapor barrier products to create that air seal. Again, we'll get into a little bit more details of that, but the number one priority here is creating an air seal at the deck level. Existing roofing conditions or roof systems can also create this air seal, and we'll talk about how this system is a great play for retrofit roofs in the coming slides. After creating the complete air seal, you'd have your specified insulation, and then our required 1/2-inch gypsum cover board or the EcoStorm cover board through Carlisle. It has to be a 1/2-inch gypsum or the EcoStorm cover board. We've had questions recently about if we could use alternative cover boards or other options, but it must be a gypsum cover board or the EcoStorm board. The system is also compatible with all 3 membranes, so EPDM, TPO, and PVC membranes. And at a 60 mil thickness, you can get a 20-year warranty. And then finally, again, instead of having stone ballast, think of this as the vents or the wind is ballasting the entire system. So you'd have that as the final component within the assembly. There are 2 main components within the VacuSeal system that differ from a standard roofing system. The first is the V2T vent. As we went over, it works in pulling air out from underneath the membrane. And also as air is moving on top of the roof, it creates that negative pressure to lock everything in place. The other component, which we haven't touched on yet, are the air distribution strips. And the air distribution strips facilitate air movement underneath the V2T vent and the membrane. These air distribution strips are installed on top of the cover board underneath the membrane. And again, I'll show you a drawing of what that looks like in the coming slides, but the air distribution strips essentially facilitate the air movement from the perimeter of the roof to the vents to allow for the vents to suck the air out from underneath the membrane, creating that negative pressure to hold everything in place. Again, our vents or the system is compatible with all 3 membranes, and we do pre-apply the skirts to the vents so that when they arrive on the job site, they're already ready to be installed or flashed into the field membrane. So the vents already come with the EPDM, TPO, or PVC skirts. This is how we sell all of our vents for each project. So the first step in the process of evaluating a roof system to see if VacuSeal is the right fit, and then also moving forward with the system, is doing an evaluation and a project roof layout of the vents and the air distribution strips. So on the left-hand side, you see an example of a layout of a VacuSeal system. The orange lines represent the air distribution strips, and the black dots represent the V2T vents that are placed on top of the roof. As you can see, typically the vents are placed around the perimeter, spaced about 20 to 25 feet inward from the perimeter, and also spaced about 20 to 25 feet apart from each other. And the air distribution strips are installed in a fashion where there's typically 3 distribution strips that are leading to a point, and the point is where the vents would be located. As I mentioned, the air distribution strips typically go from the perimeter, pulling the air from the perimeter, pulling that negative pressure through the vents, again, creating that locking or the vacuum pressure. On the right-hand side, you can see a visual of the air distribution strips being installed on the roof. Again, 3 distribution strips coming to a point, and that's where the vents will be located. A couple questions that we typically get around the air distribution strips is how they should be installed or fastened to the roof. We don't have a specific detail on how the distribution strips should be applied during installation. We've seen different things in the field. We've seen plates and fasteners being used at each end of the distribution strips and when they come together. We've seen it being tacked down with adhesive, or also using EPDM seam tape as a way to make sure that the distribution strips don't move. Really what we're looking to achieve is that the air distribution strips don't move during installation. So that's why there's not a specific detail on how they should be applied, but really we're looking for during installation for the distribution strips not to move so that we can pull the air from the perimeter to the vent locations. After the air distribution strips are installed, again, you can see in the picture to the left-hand side, they're installed above the cover board. Again, the cover board completely loose laid. Any insulation above that is loose laid as well. You're going to kick up the membrane, and as you're kicking up the membrane, we're going to mark the location of where the vents will be located. Again, this is all around that first step in the process of evaluating the roof and creating that project drawing. So you would have that in hand to know the locations of where the vents should be placed in the air distribution strips. At that location where the vents will be placed, you're going to cut a 10-inch wide diameter hole, and that matches the bottom side of that sphere of the V2T vent to allow for air movement underneath the membrane through the vents to create that negative pressure. On the next slide, I'm going to play a video that will roll through the installation steps, and I'll show you a little bit more of a visual on all the process of the installation. Some of the features and benefits of the system are here on the slide. The first being, you're really going to get the labor savings of a ballasted system. Again, all the components are loose laid, the insulation, the cover board, and the membrane. Instead of installing stone ballast, where you're going to be is installing the vents and the air distribution strip. So it's pretty much a swap as far as labor savings and materials as compared to a ballasted system. However, you're going to receive the performance of a fully adhered system. Another feature and benefits of the VacuSeal system is one, job site startup assistance. We really emphasize this because we understand that this may be a new system for some installers, and we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with how the system operates, how it works, making sure that we have a complete air seal at the deck, and all the little details with the VacuSeal system. It's not complicated, but we want to make sure that the contractor feels really comfortable. So we do provide job site startup assistance on every job for VacuSeal. And last main benefit that I want to emphasize is we're in the world of supply chain and supply issues on certain products. So just want to emphasize there's no adhesives, no plates or fasteners within this system. It's a loose laid system by the vents themselves. We have the vents in stock as well as the air distribution strips. So it's a great alternative to other systems that rely on some components that may not be available today. There are 4 key elements that we really emphasize with the VacuSeal system. And again, we would walk anyone through this process, either through the ordering or the quoting process, as well as on the job site assistance. But the first thing is the engineer drawing. As I mentioned, this is the first step in evaluating the roofing system, as well as understanding the roof layout for the vents and the air distribution strips. So this is something that we complete first with the VTT technical team. The rest of the steps are really crucial in the installation of the system. And again, we provide the job startup assistance to make sure we have a complete air seal at the deck level, we have the correct vent placements, as well as the distribution strips. We want to make sure that the system is working correctly per the engineer drawing and the layout so that we're getting enough negative pressure to hold everything in place. It's important to note as well that we do over-engineer the system to make sure that there isn't any issues. So there may be a couple additional vents on top of the roof that may not be required per se, but we really engineer the system to 195 PSF to make sure that there's enough pressure to hold everything in place. At the top of the presentation, I mentioned our partnership with VTT Technologies. Again, we've been working with them for over 10 years. Probably approaching 15 years at this standpoint. And we've warranted over 8 million square feet through CCM of the V2T product. And so while it seems like new technology, it is innovative. We feel very confident in its proven technology in the marketplace with several projects up to 8 million square feet. So Carlisle has the full backing and warranty to feel really comfortable with this system. I just want to touch real quick on the sales and order process. If you have a project that you're looking to see if VacuSeal is the right fit for, this is the high-level overview of the sales and order process. So the first step is, again, completing that job evaluation request form on the V2T website. We do have a link from the Carlisle website as well. So if you go to the Carlisle SynTec website and the VacuSeal landing page, we have added a button to go to this job evaluation request form. That form allows us to have the necessary information to do an evaluation, whether that be a new construction project or a re-roofing project, to understand if VacuSeal is the right fit. So that'll allow us to get the necessary information to do that evaluation, as well as completing the engineer design and layout of the vents and the distribution strips. Once that's completed, V2T sends that design as a full package. So what that package will include is the pricing, the roof layout with the vents and the distribution strips, as well as our spec and details to the Carlisle pricing team. Again, the point of this partnership is that you're receiving this on your end as a single source channel through Carlisle. So we work on the back end with V2T Technologies to do some of those technical resources and those takeoffs, send that into Carlisle pricing team. The Carlisle pricing team then quotes that project and sends it back to that person who requested, whether that be the rep, distributor, contractor. If it goes to the rep, we'll send it to the customer, and then it's a complete order through Carlisle. Again, single source order through Carlisle for the entire system, and it's completed through your customer service rep as you would with any other product or system. I took a snapshot here of what a quote looks like that would come from Carlisle, and I just wanted to make note of this because It will come as one line item on a quote called VacuSeal system. And what we do is we capture all the necessary information or components within the VacuSeal system. So in this one line item, we include the engineering, the startup fees, freight, materials, and that includes the V2T vent, any of the sealant tapes, the distribution strips. It all comes as one lump sum or one product code on a quote. So if you ever see that, I just wanted to make note that we do lump it together as one VacuSeal system. Really, that's to simplify the ordering process and to make sure we're not losing any look on to any of the components, so that when we ship the product, it's the full package. As I mentioned with our partnership, we enhance our marketing and technical resources that we provide through Carlisle. So please either reach out to myself, Jeremiah on the line, or look at our Carlisle SynTec website. We do have a lot of resources on the landing page for VacuSeal. That includes sell sheets, product data sheets, videos, installation videos, that animation video that I showed today, and also spec and details. The spec and details are located within Carlisle's spec supplement. But if you need a separate PDF document, please reach out to me and I can send this specifically to you. As well as during the project evaluation or the project packet, you will be receiving the spec and details with it as well. But please reach out if you need any of these pieces of literature. Lastly, I just want to touch base on some of the problem-solving applications that the VacuSeal system could fix. This system is great for occupied buildings with not having any adhesives, and really there's really low disturbance during the re-roofing or construction process. This is great for occupied buildings. In retrofit applications, VacuSeal is a cost-competitive option to go directly over the existing system, providing the same enhanced benefits of a fully adhered system. Another benefit here is that in many cases, the existing system already creates an air seal, which is critical to the performance of the VacuSeal system. So great fit for retrofit applications. Being a loose laid ballasted system, new construction concrete decks are also a good fit, especially when you can't adhere to or fasten to the deck. Again, everything's loose laid, so you wouldn't have the plates and fasteners or adhesives. You can just go directly on top of the VacuSeal system. And lastly, CCM has the exclusive on the V2T system. A lot of our reps are taking advantage of this, or contractors as well, to be competitive in the marketplace. Other wind or vent ballasted systems rely on different science principles than our negative pressure VacuSeal system. So this could definitely be a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So please take advantage of that as well. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kayla, and we'll see if there's any questions for Jeremiah and I to answer from you guys.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. So the first one that came in is, if the vent is damaged during a wind event, wouldn't that jeopardize the whole system?
I'll take that, Alex. Part of the design of the system is there's a lot of redundancy. Regardless of the size of the roof, we really only need one vent to be completely functional in order to keep the roof on. We put a lot more than one vent in the system because, one, for redundancy, and two, because we never really know which direction the wind may be coming from. So we want to be protected from every angle. But the vents, even on the opposite side of the roof, still perform the same function regardless of the direction. We just like to have those vents around the edge. So if one vent's broken, which we've had happen during some wind events, tropical storms and hurricane type situations where debris blew across the roof and damaged vents during a significant wind, and we've never really had an issue with uplift. Obviously there's damage to the membrane, there's damage to the vent that needs to be replaced, but depending on where that vent breaks, they can still function although at a diminished capacity. Depending on exactly where it breaks is going to depend on how much function they still have. But the rest of the vents on the roof, we've had up to 30 or 40% of the vents on a roof get damaged or broken from debris during a wind event, and not had any problems with uplift.
Okay, thanks, Jeremiah. The next question is, does this have a Miami-Dade NOA approval?
We do have HVAC approvals, Florida product approvals. So that would cover Dade and Ballard County. There seems to be some question about where that is, but if you have a specific project we can look at, yeah, I'm happy to help work through that process. But we do have approval for HVAC wind zones.
Okay. The next question, can you install the VacuSeal system with tapered insulation over a concrete deck?
Yes, is the short answer. Basically, any amount of insulation, you still have to have a cover board on top. But especially now with given market conditions, we can also work with alternate. It doesn't have to be ISO. It can be EPS, extruded, or ISO, tapered or flat, any thicknesses that you want. As long as we have that gyp cover board on top or the EcoStorm cover board, as long as basically a heavy cover board that's approved by Carlisle on top of the insulation, you can have as much insulation as you want, including tapered.
Okay. Next question, would a cut in the membrane affect the suction of the system?
No. Well, yes and no. It may have a slight impact, but in reality, cuts in the membrane or anything on the surface of the roof that may be a defect is really going to act as basically another vent on the roof. The primary concern there is going to be water intrusion, what that may be, detrimental to the building, to the system, and getting that fixed obviously is important. But in terms of creating an uplift issue, question, problem, lots of the other vented roof systems on the market utilize a 1 or a 2-way vent placed differently. And even though our vents are different and they actually create a negative pressure, that same concept where the pressures above the roof, the actual uplift pressures themselves, will pull air out of the system. Where we're most concerned about having good air seals are really below deck at penetrations and the walls, perimeter walls and those kinds of things, because those are areas where air can get forced into the system. A cut in the membrane or a hole in the membrane really can't force air in. And at some level, if there's much wind coming across the roof, there's going to actually be a very small negative pressure pretty much all across the roof, which is actually outlined in the principles of ASE wind design.
Okay. Another question we have is if snow affects the performance of the VacuSeal system and if there have been any installations in Canada.
We have quoted several jobs in Canada. As far as I know, we have not installed one that I can remember at least. We have done some in the northern United States, Michigan, Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, all those areas for sure. So there's been plenty that have been installed where they've gotten snow. I think, in general terms, what we have noticed and what we believe, both from experience and, just general knowledge of how the system works is, the vents are approximately 12 inches tall. If the snow gets up to about 8 to 10 inches, because of the shape of the vent, when the wind blows across the roof, it will actually create a channel through that cavity of the vent. So it'll, kind of blow through and actually still create the negative pressure It's, going to be somewhat different than it is when it's exposed, but it actually could enhance the effect of the negative pressure created by the vent. And then once we get over about, 12, 13, 14 inches of snow, which is what it takes to cover the vent completely, we are no longer worried about uplift on a roof. 12 inches of snow is going to serve as more traditional ballast, and really not, one, there's no real uplift transfer because the wind pressures can't touch the membrane of the roof because it's completely covered. And in addition to that, there's enough weight with the snow on the roof. So until that melts and goes away, we have essentially a temporary ballast on the roof when the vents are completely buried.
Okay. Another question, a couple came in on the same topic, but asking whether standard roof to wall details are still in play with the VacuSeal system or if that changes at all.
So the wall flashings themselves will remain the same. What changes is the base tie-in or angle change detail. And that changes to actually kind of accomplish two goals with one detail. So we're going to be creating an air seal and also accomplish the base tie-in angle change fastening. So we're doing both of those things with one detail, and that's generally basically going to be, instead of using a rust strip or screws and plates to fasten the membrane or rust strip or whatever at that location, we're going to require that the field membrane gets turned up the wall or curve or any, whatever vertical termination there may be, but field membrane actually gets turned up. There's a butyl tape, which we call the VacuSeal sealant tape, that goes behind that membrane. And then a termination bar fastens that with fastener 6 inches on center. So we are kind of complicating that detail a little bit, especially when you're talking about, products like rust strip and those things. But we're creating a very robust tie-in as well as creating that air seal all in one detail. So we're not looking at creating air seals in other locations. And then the walls or curbs or whatever the penetrations may be, just get flashed like standard details. You go back to standard details for everything above that base tie-in angle change detail.
I just want to add that detail that Jeremiah just outlined is in the spec supplement. So again, that is sent during the project evaluation or the packet that you would get from our pricing team with the drawing and the layout, as well as, again, it always resides in our spec supplement. So either check out the spec supplement or please reach out if you want that specific detail or the packet of details.
Okay. Another question, can you eliminate the need to tear off the existing roof by using the VacuSeal system?
In a lot of cases, yes. There are certainly situations where, NRCA recommendations as well as industry best practices would dictate that the roof should be torn off. And in those instances, we're not really going to go against industry standards, but there are many cases where, let's just say you wanted to go over a roof that may have, it's dirty and has stuff on it that would create problems if you're going to try to adhere to that roof. Well, we're not worried about the adhesion or any kind of tack or any kind of situation like that. Everything's going to be loose laid. We're going to sit on top, so there's no reason why we can't go directly over that type of roof. And there's a lot of situations where we can go over top of a roof that may not be a good situation with more traditional roof systems, but it's perfectly fine for us because we're not depending on adhering or mechanically attaching to that structure, to that roof. We're just relying on the air seal and that attachment to create that negative pressure and keep the roof on.
Okay, another one I think came in a couple of times. Can this be installed with non-reinforced EPDM?
Yes. That's a pretty easy answer, but yeah, we've done lots of roofs with unreinforced EPDM, 60 and 90 mil both. So yeah.
Okay, another one, does this system meet any FM ratings?
Meeting FM ratings and being FM approved aren't really the same thing. So meeting FM ratings, yeah, sure, we can do pressure calculations and uplift calculations and show that we are equal to, whatever, potentially some rating that may be specified. And we're happy to do those calculations and provide that information for anybody that's trying to, submit this to an architect or consultant or even building code official who is citing FM takeoffs. What we don't have is FM testing and approval, and that is primarily because FM's test, generally how they test roofs is they pressurize the underside of the membrane, and essentially wherever that roof pops and comes loose when they pressurize that underside is what the rating is for that particular system. That type of test will not work with any type of ballasted roof, whether that's traditional ballast or wind ballasted. And that's essentially because you're doing the opposite of what the system is designed to do by applying a positive pressure underneath the membrane.
Okay, just a few more. The next one, in one of the slides that Alex was showing, the vents were installed around the perimeter. So on a larger roof, the question is, are vents installed in the middle of the roof?
So where vents would be installed in the middle of the roof are anytime we have a roof that's 250 feet in both directions. So if the roof is 250 feet in both directions, we would install essentially one vent in the dead center of the roof. Those vents, obviously on larger roofs, the spacing is up to 125 feet between vents. So vents in the center of the roof are pretty rare and really only occur on large roof areas. When there's L shapes and all kinds of things, it gets slightly more complicated. But yeah, the short answer is yes, sometimes we do have vents in the middle, but they're only required when a roof is 250 feet in both directions.
Okay, a couple more. The next one, what are the best practices or considerations for keeping the system in place during the roofing process before the system is complete?
The best thing that, we're always going to go through this during startup and also conversations leading up to startup, are we always want to start in an area on the roof. Yeah, lots of times it's a corner. It doesn't have to be. But we want to start where we can get some perimeter or edging sealed off. And we have to come out far enough on the first day to install at least one vent. That's because, the vents are what's holding the roof on. We do want to get some air seals installed, and we also want to get at least one vent installed in the sequencing. But other than that, the night tie-ins and those kinds of things can follow pretty standard procedures. That keeps most of the air out. But obviously, if we don't have any vents installed, then we have nothing holding that membrane in place.
Okay, then we got a couple questions about available warranties. You could just explain those.
Alex, you want to do that?
Yeah, I can take that. So this system is warranted up to 20 years. Again, a 60 mil thickness of the membrane at 90 miles per hour. It's typical standard warranty though through Carlisle. So there's not a separate fee charge or separate NOC or NOA application or anything like that. So it's a standard warranty from Carlisle, but again, up to 20 years, 90 miles per hour.
Okay, we'll do one more, and anything that we didn't get to here, we'll address off the call, make sure that all these questions get answered. So the last one is on recovery systems. Would these vents be used in conjunction with one-way vents, or does it take the place of one-way vents?
That question, yeah, in general, these would take the place of one-way vents. And if there's a need to ventilate something, another roof system or the deck or something in some application, and one-way vents were needed, we would need to know about that, be aware of the location, and also we'd want to be involved in coming up with how to isolate those vents from this system so there's no negative impact on the performance of the system. It can be used, but typically wouldn't be necessary.
Okay, and then just one more that just came in here, a little bit of a hot topic, so we'll address this one, but they're asking about material availability.
Yeah, that is a bit of a hot topic. Our vents, with all the types of membrane skirts, so TPO, PVC, EPDM, all the distribution strip are readily available. We have plenty in stock to ship, quickly. We can get most any size job shipped most anywhere in the country within a week. 2 weeks is more comfortable, gives us more time to pack it up. Bigger jobs, we have plenty of vents in stock. We have plenty of raw materials. We've stayed ahead of that process. We have seen extended lead times on our raw materials and some of the other components, but essentially we're doubling up and really staying ahead of that curve in terms of having vents available. Obviously, all the other components needed for the roof, the membrane, everything else is subject to the same thing as every other system. But we do have a lot of flexibility with what types of components can be used. So sometimes that in and of itself creates an advantage.
Thanks, Jeremiah. I appreciate you taking a lot of those questions that we got in from the audience. I'll wrap things up here. I just want to say that this was recorded, so we'll send this out in the summary email to all the attendees and those who have registered. There were a few more questions that came in that we will address afterwards. I believe we'll be creating like an FAQ document to make sure that we address all the questions and those that have different themes around them. Just want to say thank you to Jeremiah from V2T to being on the line, as well as Kayla for organizing and facilitating the question and answers. And thank you guys for attending this morning's webinar.
Thanks, Alex.